Hello and welcome to Auditing and Assurance lesson. Today we are going to outline the factors considered before using the computer assisted audit techniques, the CAATS. We'll also analyze the steps in the application of CAATS. So those are two things. One, factors considered before using CAATS, factors considered before using CAATS, and two, steps in CAATS application. So let's begin with the factors. What are the factors that the auditor should consider before using CAATS? That's the question that you want to answer first. Because we know that the CAATS, the computer assisted audit techniques, are powerful tools that can significantly enhance efficiency and effectiveness of audits. But before utilizing the CAATS, auditors must carefully consider several factors to ensure their appropriate and successful application. So the first factor is audit objectives. The objectives of the audit must be considered first. The auditor is required to clearly define the audit objectives and then determine if CAATS align with those objectives, because not all audit procedures are suitable for CAATS. So first of all, identify the audit objectives. Two, cost benefit analysis. Carry out cost benefit analysis. Evaluate the costs associated with the CAATS, including software acquisition, training, and implementation, against the potential benefits in terms of time savings, accuracy, expanded audit coverage, and so on. So have the costs associated with the software and the benefits that are expected to be generated from the use of the software. Cost benefit analysis. 2 or 3, consider the data availability. The auditor has to consider data availability and reliability. Consider data availability and reliability. The auditor should ensure that the necessary data is available in a format compatible with the chosen computer assisted audit technique. The auditor again has to assess the reliability and the integrity of the data to avoid drawing incorrect conclusions. 4, system complexity. Consider the complexity of the system. Consider the complexity of the system being audited, because CAATS may be more suitable for complex systems with larger volumes of data where manual testing would be impractical. So CAATS come in to assist in systems that are complex. So that has to be considered. Is the system complex or not? If it's straightforward, then the CAATS cannot be relied upon. 5, auditors' expertise. Using CAATS requires some level of expertise. So here the auditor has to assess his knowledge and skills in using CAATS, because adequate training is required. Adequate experience is also crucial for successful application of these techniques. So it is not just the auditor as an individual, but the audit team has to be well skilled in the use of the CAATS. That is the 5th factor. 6, control environment has to be taken into account. The control environment. The auditor has to evaluate the effectiveness of the organization's internal controls, because strong controls may allow for more reliance on CAATS, while weak controls may necessitate additional manual procedures. So the control environment has to be evaluated to check the its effectiveness. 7, time constraint. Time constraints. Consider the availability of time for the audit. The auditor has to consider if he has time for the audit, because CAATS can then help save time, but their implementation may require additional time upfront. Then lastly, confidentiality and security. This is an important factor that has to be considered. The auditor should ensure that the use of CAATS does not compromise the confidentiality or security of the client's data. So these are factors that the auditor has to consider before using computer-assisted audit techniques. 1, audit objectives. 2, cost-benefit analysis. 3, data availability and reliability. 4, system complexity. 5, auditors expertise. 6, the control environment. 7, time constraints. And lastly, confidentiality and security. Moving on to the steps in CAATS application. Steps in CAATS application. Steps in CAATS application. Steps in CAATS application. Now, once the decision to use CAATS has been made, based on the factors that the auditor has to consider, then there are steps that should be followed for successful implementation. And the first step is defining objectives. 1, define objectives. Define objectives. Clearly define the objectives of using CAATS for the specific audit procedure. Very important step. All right, the auditor has to clearly define the objectives of using CAATS for specific audit procedures. Then he has to select the appropriate CAATS. Select the appropriate CAATS. Select the appropriate CAATS. That means the auditor has to choose the appropriate computer-assisted auditing techniques based on the audit objectives and the characteristics of the system that is being audited. And that should involve using generalized audit software, which will be useful for data extraction, which will be useful for data analysis, or specialized audit software for specific tasks that the auditor is required to carry out. Select the appropriate CAATS. 2 is to obtain the CAATS, obtain and select data, or prepare. Let me use the word prepare. Obtain and prepare data. Obtain data and prepare data. Extract the necessary data from the client system, then convert it into a format that is compatible with the chosen computer-assisted auditing technique. You understand? Then step number 4 is to design and execute tests. Design and execute tests. Design and execute tests. That involves developing test procedures that involves developing the criteria based on the audit objectives. The auditor can then execute the test using the selected computer or assisted audit technique. Design and execute tests. The obvious step is to analyze results. After executing tests, the auditor can then analyze the results. Analyze the results. Clearly or carefully analyze, the auditor should analyze the results that are generated by the CAATS. The auditor, in analyzing the data, can identify anomalies or errors or even control weaknesses. Analyze the results after executing the test. 6. Document findings. The auditor here is required to document findings. Document the CAATS. In documenting the findings, first of all, the auditor is required to document the CAATS procedures that are performed. It should also document the results obtained and the conclusions reached. You understand? Then lastly, the auditor can do a follow-up. That means investigating any significant findings or exceptions identified by the computer-assisted auditing technique, and then taking appropriate action. So that's it, candidates. These are the steps in CAATS application, how to apply. All right? Once the decision to use CAATS has been made, then first of all, define objectives of using the CAATS, select the appropriate CAATS, obtain and prepare data, then execute the data. After executing the data, the CAAT will give you results which you need to analyze. Then you document the findings and make follow-up. You understand? So, candidates, by considering the factors before using the CAATS and by following the steps in CAATS application, auditors can effectively leverage the CAATS, which is a powerful tool to enhance audit processes and deliver high quality audit results. So first of all, the auditor is required to put into consideration certain factors, because we've said that not all data can be used or processed by the CAATS. So before that is done, before the auditor decides to apply CAATS, then he has to first of all consider certain factors which you have identified. Then this is the procedure that has to be followed in applying the CAATS. Then that's it for today's lesson. Assignment 1. What are the key factors that auditors should consider before deciding to use CAATS during an audit engagement? Number 2. Outline the essential steps involved in the application of CAATS, from planning, preparation to execution and reporting. 3. How can auditors ensure the reliability and validity of the results obtained through the use of CAATS? 4. Discuss the importance of documenting the use of CAATS, including the methodology, procedures, and findings to support the audit conclusions. 5. Explain how auditors can evaluate the effectiveness of CAATS in achieving the desired audit objectives and identify areas for improvement. In our next lesson, we are going to study the advantages and disadvantages of CAATS. Bye.